this aspect is around the world, including Nigeria. And for that matter, aquaculture welfare is even much more neglected than the other farmed animals in the world. And these concerns did lead us to take on a novel project to ascertain the level of awareness, knowledge, and the practice of any form of animal welfare components in the aquaculture industry in Nigeria. We sought data that covered quite a whole lot, and also, of course, overall perspective of fish farmers, consumers, government entities, and as well as other stakeholders. It is very important for me at this point to also bring in and thank of funders, animal charity evaluators. They supported us to implement this project with funding, for which we are really very grateful. And today we are very happy that we can gather various stakeholders across the world like this here to present the results from our survey. We had this at various geopolitical zones, the 6 geopolitical zones in Nigeria. And as we move forward to take up the reason why we are here, I'd like to quickly first of all announce that Mr. Samuel Oga, our lead for animal welfare programs, is unavoidably absent to take up this result, which is why our dear founder and director, Dr. Kikiope Oluwarore, will be making that presentation in his stead. So also, just so you know that we'll be having questions and answer section for about 15 minutes after Dr. Kiki would have made her presentation of the reason we're here this afternoon. Of course, it's afternoon in Nigeria. Then thereafter 15 minutes, we will have question and answers. So if you have any questions while she's making her presentation, kindly note it down, and there will be time for that. So at this juncture, I will just kindly call on Dr. Kikiope Oluwarore to.
Thank you so much, Elena, for the introduction. And I hope we can all see my screen, please. First of all, I want to give a very warm welcome to everybody. And with the people that we have here, I feel very much at home because I mean, the animal welfare space is a very key part of my work and also the part of OHDI. And I very much feel at home because I'm speaking with people of like minds, people who have a lot of passion for animal welfare and a lot of interest in this growing space of aquaculture welfare particularly. And again, my name is I am Dr. Kikiope Oluwarore, and I'm the founder of One Health and Development Initiative. And I'll be making this presentation on behalf of Samuel Oga, who is our program lead, who could not be present at this time due to some health challenges. And I want to take us on a journey of exactly how we've been able to work on this project, aquaculture welfare. This field of welfare is very much still very nascent in Africa and particularly in Nigeria. And to now go and dive deeper in aquaculture welfare is something that we are very much excited about. So I'll be presenting this research project that we did on perceptions, practices, and awareness of aquaculture welfare in Nigeria among different stakeholders, including farmers, including the government, including associations and people who work in the field of fish production. So let's move ahead. So I'll give a little bit of an introduction of background as to the basics of this particular research and also dive into research and research justification. So first of all, I mean, I'm sure many of us know that aquaculture is also known as fish farming, and is the growing of fish and other aquatic organisms by human beings, by humans basically. And maybe a newer information will be that, you know, Nigeria is the most populous Black nation in the world. There's just so many of us here. And maybe because it's a high population country, we do have a lot of aquaculture production on the continent. And so according to data, the total aquaculture production in sub-Saharan Africa is coming from 52% of total aquaculture production is coming from Nigeria only. And also to note that after Egypt, Nigeria has the largest second aquaculture industry in the entire Africa. This includes sub-Saharan Africa and also North Africa. And of course, we can assume, and also based on data, that we are the largest consumers of fish in Africa, and we are one of the highest in the world. And so we can imagine how much of aquaculture production is going in the country. In fact, as at a few years ago, it used to be a major export. The country used to be a major exporter of fish for a long time. And so it's very much a very ripe place to be able to understand all this welfare awareness or perceptions or practice and see if it's really something that is being practiced here. Then the other thing that I would also like to mention is, excuse me, okay. Excuse me, I think I'm having issues. With the slide. Okay, great. Yes, the other thing that I should mention is that the industry continues to grow for a lot of reasons, not just about the population now. Now, we have the demand for fish products, fish and fish products in Nigeria is about 3 million metric tons annually. And that's just for local demand. And then we have about only 1 million metric tons of fish out of this supplied locally, 313,000 only from aquaculture, and 750,000 from capture fisheries. And then we have the remaining 2 million metric tons, which leaves a huge gap, which currently is being met by fish importation. And in a country that is trying to, encourage local supply of items from food products to supplies and different things, we know that even importation is still being frowned upon at this time, but there is still a huge demand. And so a lot of times, or currently, because of this very, very huge gap in demand and in supply of fish and fish products, a lot of people are going into aquaculture because they consider it a viable source of income, because even what we have still is not meeting our demand. So of course, aquaculture is still very much being encouraged as a source of protein, particularly in this case, affordable, nutritious and available. And for now, fish is really meeting these needs, and aquaculture is being encouraged in the country. I will discuss more on this after we've presented our results and some of the things that we can derive from here. So now, research justification, goals, and expected outcomes. So while the industry continues to grow, I mean the aquaculture production industry, there is little said or known about the welfare aspect, and practices on fish farms, they're not very much regulated. And even if it's regulated, there's a lot of focus on just fish health and farm management. So it is not clear if people really understand the role of sentience, and if they consider it and put this and integrate it into their regular farming practices. So, and also because of the fact that, like we will see later, there's little to no data on fish and aquaculture welfare compared to what we have on fish production and consumption, or the fish value chain, or even fish health. So there's a lot of emphasis on just the production aspects and of course the socioeconomic aspects and the consumption, but not necessarily a lot of data on actual fish and aquaculture welfare, which really is not very surprising. Yeah. And then because of the growth of factory farming, over the years, which I'm sure a lot of us are familiar with, there's a lot of concerns about welfare of animals, and in this case now including fish. We are thinking of the consumer health. We are thinking of environment. We are thinking of sustainability. We are thinking of climate change impact of factory farming, and all of this are really put into context when you think about aquaculture welfare. Now, the goal of our research is that we want to determine the knowledge, the attitudes, practices, perceptions of stakeholders on aquaculture welfare in Nigeria. And we hope that all our major goal and expected outcome is that we want to be able to provide background information on the prevalent knowledge and practices of aquaculture welfare in fish production, the value chain, or in policy. And we also wanted to see, create a background information so that we can be able to highlight the needs for further research or for further interventions. And also particularly, for us as a nonprofit organization who is very much into implementing interventions for animal welfare, we also want to be able to provide evidence for strategies and interventions for improving aquaculture welfare practices, and also its integration into existing fish production systems. So our methodology. Now, we employed a mixed methods approach, and we usually do this for a lot of the research that we do, because we understand that, sometimes we don't want to just rely on just one method of gathering data. We understand that we can get data from using both quantitative data and also qualitative data. So we like which we know that will improve the reliability and validity of our results, of our research results. So we did literature review of research papers from peer-reviewed journals, and then we also reviewed great literature from from farmers associations who have websites. We checked government institutions, particularly ministries of agriculture or aquaculture or natural resources, where such relevant articles on fish and fish production could be domiciled. Then we implemented, we developed survey questionnaires and then shared it across 19 states across Nigeria. So now Nigeria has 37 states. And those 37 states are housed in what we call the 6 geopolitical zones. So we selected 3 states out of each geopolitical zone because we wanted enough representation of all the 6 geopolitical zones, due to, that geopolitical zones in Nigeria have like their specific, or it's similar, but they also have like tribal, some people might have like tribal intricacies to it. So maybe just to have context and representation very much particularly. So, and then from this, we from the survey questionnaires were applied on 611 fish farmers. And we also got data from 608 fish consumers. Then we applied key informant interviews, or we engaged in key informant interviews with, very key stakeholders that we know that are important to the conversation of fish and of aquaculture welfare. We interviewed government officials, 6 researchers, and 5 members and leaders of fish farm associations. Now, all of these people, once again, were located in different parts of Nigeria, just to ensure that we are getting a lot of representation across the country. So if we check this map, we can see this red boundaries identify the 6 geopolitical zones. We have one here. We have one that can be seen here. We have one, a third one here. This is, I think, northwest geopolitical zone. This is northeast. This is north central. This is southwest, south, and then southeast. So we ensure that we're able to capture data from all the major zones, from all the 6 geopolitical zones in Nigeria. And the 19 states are the ones shaded in yellow. And you can see that there is a lot of representation, which was our main goal in the deployment of our surveys here. So the other thing is that we also we trained data collectors across the country, because they were very, and a lot of kudos to them. They were very helpful in after training them on the data collection process and how we wanted it to go. They were very helpful in, disseminating the survey across the country. And of course, we're able to get very good representation from more than at least 600 people across the country. So data analysis, we use Microsoft Excel and SPSS to analyze quantitative data. and then did a lot of content analysis supported by the use of in vivo for qualitative data. Now, presentation on results, the main reason we are here today. So for the fish farmers, I will start with the demography for each of the categories of people that we collected data from. So I'll be discussing results that we got from fish farmers. I'll be discussing results that we got from the fish consumers, people who regularly eat fish. And then I'll be discussing results from the stakeholders who were engaged in key informant interviews, which include government officials, which include leaders and members of fish farm associations, and also researchers who work in fish or aquaculture welfare. So now this is a little bit about demography for the fish farmers. Like I said before, we had a number of 611 respondents to our surveys, and we got data from 19 states across the country. And the mean number of people per state was 32. Median 30, and mode 30. Now, for those who are very, very familiar with statistics, this mean, median, and mode show a fair representation of our respondents, a fair distribution and representation, which can be applied or generalized to the general population of fish farmers across Nigeria. So we can also see here that standard deviation is 7.7, meaning that it's a lot of representation and application to the data results could be fairly generalized to the large number population of fish farmers that we have in Nigeria, which might probably run into hundreds of thousands or millions. Then the least states we collected data was 12, and then the maximum was 53. I think for this 12 was, we originally wanted to collect, or for most of the states, the benchmark was that we got 30, our target was to get at least 30 respondents per state. But while the data collection was going on for a state like this, which had just 12 people, it was around the time when Nigeria was having, we had those flood, issues, a lot of flooding issues in some parts of the country. And so because of that, data collection had to stop in some of those states, like these states that had 12, I think Anambra or so, and there was a flooding crisis in that place. So we had to halt data collection there. And then we supplemented also by some states who had slightly higher than our target number of respondents and then slightly lower. So we can see the age group of our respondents. Majority of them are male, and the minority are female. So 85% are male and 15% approximately are female. And based on the age distribution here, we can see that majority of them are between the ages of 25 and 44 years old. So that's it for, so moving on to also, much more demographical information. We asked them a couple of questions to get a sense of what the fish industry is like. So a lot of them said that they are fish farmers or they are fish managers and they manage their farms directly, like they are the ones in charge of managing their farms. And the remaining 20% of these ones indicate that they are just fish farm owners. So they don't necessarily manage their farms directly, but they are still involved in the day-to-day supervisory process of the farm. 50% of them indicate that they have at least 5 years experience in fish farming, and the rest indicate that they have between 1 to 4 years experience in fish farming. 40% of them have more than 5,000 fishes on their farm, and most of them breed catfish. Catfish is actually like the major fish species that is farmed in Nigeria. Some others, might be tilapia, and some others might be some other species, but catfish is the major. Over 90% of them usually would breed catfish or breed both catfish and tilapia. And 75% of them mentioned that they sell to local fish markets. Some others might sell to supermarkets, some others might, do some exports out of the country. But exports used to be much more than this. But because of a couple of issues with bans and all, which we'll discuss later, it has reduced drastically. And then in terms of monthly incomes, and we wanted to understand monthly, income levels or income remuneration, because it's a key part, particularly and this is not just in Africa, this is across the world. The income level of a lot of farmers really is a factor as to if they would want to invest in welfare practices or not. So we see that found out that 50% of them earn monthly incomes between 50,000 naira and 500,000 naira, which in this case is estimated as between 109 and 1,087 $1,000, while others, that's the remaining 40%, will earn more, and I mean as high as, some of them indicated they earn as high as 5 million naira. So we can, so I mean this is also something to note for further discussion. And now, when we ask them a couple of questions that have to do with their knowledge of welfare, or fish welfare particularly. And 65% of them said that they have never heard of fish welfare. And many of those who indicated because after we asked them, have you heard of fish welfare, yes or no, then for those who had heard about it, can you define it? So we saw that a lot of the definitions for those who indicated that they know about fish welfare were mostly on fish health or management practices. Just a few people mentioned things that relate to sentience and to the fact that fish having sentience and being able to experience pain and suffering and different kind of feelings and things like that. So 65% is the benchmark, but we can see that there might be more people who really don't understand what exactly fish welfare means. Then 97% of them believe that fish experience pain and suffering. For those that don't believe, for the really minority that don't believe, they said things like, oh, fish don't talk, so how can I know that they experience pain and suffering? Some of them said they feel that fish only feel pain when they're out of water. And some of them also said they believe that it's not been proven yet that fish can experience pain and suffering. Then 12% of them indicate that they know, only 12% indicate that they know about fish welfare standards, whether locally or globally. So there's poor knowledge about this, of if there are really standards that guide what the fish welfare practices should be. Then 62% of them approximately believe that their fellow farmers and consumers actually care about fish welfare. We also now ask them about key welfare practices. We ask them to indicate if these are things that are regularly practiced on their farms or not. So 10% of them mentioned that they self-reported that yes, they do keep fish out of water for longer periods of time, and by longer periods we mean things like for more than 10 minutes or so out of water. And then 6% of them self-reported that they self-medicate on their farms and they use antibiotics as particularly, a lot of them said because it's they believe antibiotics help the animals to grow better and to become healthy. So of course they do that. Then a lot of them indicate that sometimes their water is not usually at optimum standards, so they have issues with poor water quality. And then some also indicated that they have high stocking density of overpopulation of the fish of their farms. 31% indicate that they do underfeed, and a lot of them attributed this underfeeding to the fact that sometimes they don't have enough money to really give their fish the kind of food that they should be having. And so they have to manage funds and manage resources, and then they end up underfeeding their fish. And then 3% of them admitted to using growth stimulants or hormones to, which they believe that will help the fish grow faster. And then after all this, self-reporting, then we ask them that if you are provided with evidence and you are trained on actual fish welfare practices, would you really implement this practice? And they said 98% of them said yes, that they would actually if they are given guidelines on what to do and what not to do, and they would actually implement it, fish welfare practices on their farms. Then that's it for fish farmers. Now moving to fish consumers. Again, we start with demography, and again, we can see that we reached 19 states. The range was between 26 and 56 people per state. We had a total number of 608 respondents for consumers. And we can see here also that the mean, median, and mode indicates a fair representation and also generalizability of our data across boards, across the population of fish consumers in Nigeria. So based on the gender here, we can see that it's almost half and half. 56% of our respondents were male and 44% of them are female. And we can see that in the particular age group, we can see that more people, there are more people within the age group of 25 to 44, and even younger, even 18, 24 people who, who were engaged in the survey compared to the fish farmers. So for fish consumers, demography also still moving on this. We can see that 89% of them reside in urban and peri-urban areas. 77% of them are employed. 90% of them earn less than 250,000 naira. So that's about $543 monthly. And actually, out of that 90%, about 40% of them, of respondents, earn less than $109 monthly. So this is something to think about, because a lot of times when people have lower purchasing power, they're able to make less choices with regards to what kind of food, and in this case, what kind of fish they want to consume. Do they want to go for fish that's been bred in better welfare standards, or do they want to just move with whatever comes their way because they really don't have that much income level to be able to make good choices with regards to what kind of fish they want to consume, and that kind of thing. Then 7% of them indicate that they purchase fish in local fish markets, while others purchase from supermarkets, restaurants, and fish farms. And this really makes sense because, like I mentioned in the fish farmers parts, most of the fish farmers supply or sell their fish in local fish markets. And so, of course, consumers would naturally go to fish markets to also get their regular fish. Then we can see here also talking about the fish welfare, knowledge of fish welfare. We can see that 66% of consumers had never heard of fish welfare, which is almost similar to what we saw with the fish farmers. And again, many define welfare on things focused on, for those of them that indicated that they know about fish welfare, they talked about fish health and management practices and had little to say on sentience. And then we can see that 83% of them believe that fish can experience pain and suffering, and others say that they don't, they don't believe in fish having any feelings or being able to experience pain and suffering. Then only 77% of them indicate that they know of fish welfare standards locally or globally. And 91% of them indicate that they would care more about fish welfare if they are provided with evidence, or if they were willing to know more about what exactly was fish welfare and what's it about. Then I would go here to talk about about fish welfare practices and what consumers thought about it. So we asked them questions to indicate which of the following practices were considered violations of, if they believed it was a good fish welfare practice or a bad welfare practice. So 89% of them, and further, just to continue on that, furthering on indicating whether it was good or bad, for those that said they were bad, we asked them if they wanted legislation, or if they felt like there should be actual legislation or policies that would be able to address some of those poor welfare practices. So I would run through this over the next few minutes. So 89% of them believe that keeping fish out of water for long periods was a bad welfare practice, and 66% of them believe that there should be legislation or policies or something to address those kind of practices. Then 75% of them indicated that self-medication and antibiotic misuse was an issue, and that it is good to have legislation on it. 91% of them believe that poor water quality was a bad welfare practice, and 77% of them would want legislation on it. Majority also talked about overpopulation and high stocking density, that they mentioned that it was a bad welfare practice, and it would be good to have some legislation on it. They also indicated underfeeding. And then only compared to other fish welfare practices that already had a lot of majority agreeing that it was a bad fish welfare practice, 56% of people only indicated that administering hormones or growth stimulants was not a good fish welfare practice. So, however, when indicated if like if they had a fish farm who had all of this or one or more of these practices, would they still purchase from a farm that has these issues? And 7% of them said yes, that they will still purchase from a farm with this practice, while the remaining said no, they won't. If they knew that this was going on, then they will not purchase fish products from these farms. So now moving on to our fish stakeholders, people that we engage in key informant interviews. Like I mentioned before, we had researchers, we had members and leaders of associations and groups of fish farmers, and then we also had 5 government staff. Researchers included university lecturers and of course researchers who work in Department of Fisheries, of Aquaculture, of Marine Science, and who also engage in fish farm consultancies. All of them, or maybe most of them, let's say maybe 4/6 or 5/6 had PhDs. So there's a level of educational advancement in this group of people. Then for the for the members and leaders of fish farm associations and groups, most of them were presidents of what they call CAFAN. CAFAN is called Catfish Association of Nigeria. So there's a national body, and then we have state bodies of this particular association. So we had the people that we engage in this informant interview. Some of them were presidents. About 3 of them were presidents at the state level, and about 2 of them were members, very active members of the associations. We also had a respondent that we engaged in KII, who was the president of the World Aquaculture Society in the Africa region. So, and then for the 5 government staff that we engage in KIIs, all of them were either directors, officers in ministries of agriculture or fisheries, and the rest of it. And many of them engage in policy development and implementation and advisory to the government for welfare, for fish production, anything in regards to fish production or fish existence in Nigeria. So regards to, we asked them some questions on like their basic knowledge on fish welfare. So many of them, of course, which is a good sign, indicated that they actually know what fish welfare meant. When we asked them questions on what fish welfare was, they acknowledged, many of them acknowledged the role of sentience. They talked about living conditions, talked about good treatment of fish, talked about the environment and housing, talked about water quality, talked about the issue of stress factors, talked about the handling and the slaughter and the feeding of fish and how they all contribute to good welfare practices. However, there were a couple of misconceptions where somebody mentioned that, fish welfare also includes administering antibiotics. And also some people really focus more on the health and management aspect of fish than the actual welfare of fish. And many of them, when asked on where they learned about this, this fish welfare, where they got their fish welfare knowledge, many of them said that, to be honest, it's very new for them, but they have been able to learn through reading books, through practical field experience, by attending conferences, by doing research, or among the farmers particularly, which we are really glad about, is the fact that some of them, because they have associations, so they have their learning days where they have their meetings and they're able to share new knowledge or share new information. So for the fish farmers, a lot of them were able to learn about fish welfare from some of this association, what's it called now, from some of these association meetings that they have. Then when asked about their belief in sentience, all of them said that they do believe in sentience of animals, particularly of fish, and they know that fish feel pain and suffering. And they were actually, but some of them were still a bit cautious about, if there was really scientific evidence as to whether fish were sentient or if they were feeling pain and suffering. So we asked them about the, aquaculture welfare practices that were common among farms in the country. And they mentioned a variety of it, including overstocking, which is, we've mentioned, some people mentioned multi-species farming, which causes a lot of, carnivorous, which caused a lot of dominance within the different species in farming, and is considered not a very good management and even of welfare practices. Some of them also mentioned the issue of transport and the fact that transport was actually a very, very big issue. Excuse me, trying to. Oh. Excuse me. So transport was actually a very big issue, because many of them said that, and which is a regular practice in Nigeria, that people will pack their fish inside sacks or inside like when they are selling to the markets, for example. It's common to see people put live fish, particularly catfish, in sacks, and then just transport it like that without being put in water to markets. Or sometimes they put them in water bowls and leave them out in the open. And because of the heat, because of the climate in Nigeria, where Nigeria is a generally hot country, the water bowls heat up, and then the water heats up, and then it causes a lot of stress for the fish when the fish start responding to start having heat stress. And then we also have issues of poor slaughter, where a lot of times the fish are not slaughtered properly. And we know that for catfish are really very hardy, and can be and when they are slaughtered, they might even be alive longer than expected, and that's a very it's a very bad welfare practice. Some of them are used explosive when they are having their fish inside, for example, in natural water bodies. A lot of them indicated that antimicrobial misuse was quite common, and the use of even pesticides and chemicals, particularly in water bodies. Then they mentioned also poor water quality, the use of growth hormones, the issue of underfeeding, and also bad housing. So one key bad housing that was really mentioned was the use of tarpaulins. And so that tarpaulins actually, they absorb heat. And so when they absorb heat, it causes heat stress. It warms up the water bodies in the fish farms, and then it causes heat stress for the fish also. And coming to legislation and standards or procedures for fish welfare, many of them said that they don't have knowledge of any policy or any specific policy on fish welfare. Some indicate that they know of policies, but most of the ones that they know are in developed countries, but they can't really remember the specifics. However, one person indicated that there are some SOPs in the ministry, but none of them are specific to aquaculture welfare or even animal welfare in particular. While others indicated things like ASIP, HACCP, and then talked about NAFDAC as one regulation that is existing, but they were not really sure if it had anything on fish welfare or not. So we asked them about challenges, in implementing fish welfare practices, and they mentioned that, first of all, factory farming is a big issue, and which is not surprising because there is a lot of demand, like I've mentioned, a lot of demand for fish. Fish is considered one of the most affordable sources of protein, whether animal or plant, in Nigeria. And because of that, there has been an emphasis on factory farming. And so this has increased the incidence of poor welfare practices across the fish farmings and fish farmers in Nigeria. Also, the fact that there is a lack of knowledge on fish farming is still a very new concept to many people. And many people don't really understand what it means, or how they can implement it, or how it can, they don't understand the basics of, first of all, animal sentience, and then now moving to fish, and how they can actually integrate a lot of these fish welfare practices on their farms. Then the other challenge is that, the agriculture industry generally, including fish aquaculture, is very profits driven. So people care more about profits than actual welfare of animals. And a lot of them suggested and recommended that campaigns for fish welfare, or discussions or discourse on fish welfare, should include incentives that would include the fact that they would be able to, it will help, it would improve the viability of the fish, and it will improve, to drive incentives for a lot of these fish. And a lot of them said that, yes, they are willing to adopt or support the dissemination of aquaculture welfare practices once they are engaged, and they also will need to build capacity in some of those areas where necessary. So a lot of information has been given in this, and to be honest, this was very, very much summarized. There's so many things that were included in this report, but when we officially publish it as a technical report, we'll be giving We'll be disseminated in everybody to really read more and understand better some of these things I've talked about. But out of this bulk of information that we have some key recommendations and next steps that were considered. Both based on the recommendations were based on the results that we received, and also some of the things that were mentioned by the interviewers or by the respondents of our surveys themselves. So first of all, one key recommendation was that there needs to be public awareness on animal welfare as a whole. And animal welfare in the sense that, fish is an important part of animal welfare, but even making it, fish is the core part of this work. But even broadly talking, there needs to be more sensitization and more awareness and more acceptance of animal welfare among the population of Nigerians. And this is something that we as OHDI have known for a while, and it's something that we are very much keen to continue to promote. And that in talking about animal welfare, we need to emphasize on the role of sentience, on the role of the fact that animals have feelings, animals are able to feel pain, feel suffering, and their needs, and they should be able to express their natural behaviors. And this includes whether they are in capture or they are living in the natural environment. So, and there were suggestions to use both traditional and social media to be able to promote these messages, whether through community outreaches, whether through radio, whether through TV, particularly for those who live in like the rural areas who might not be able to get access to social media and even TV, but radio is one key way to reach people across boards in Nigeria. And there was also a lot of information about using social media as a platform to promote information on animal welfare. So then there were also another recommendation was that there was a need to train, or there is a need to train and build the capacity of fish farmers and stakeholders on aquaculture welfare practices, and not just training them on it, but also to find ways to integrate them with existing farm management practices, because that we know we encourage would guarantee sustainability of some of this training, and would also help to, it's also good because it helps people to be able to localize these aquaculture welfare practices, because it's not just a foreign thing, but it's something that can even happen even within your own farm, within your own sociocultural arrangement within your own existence. So you can be able to localize and integrate these aquaculture welfare practices into your existing farm management work. Then another thing was that that we see is the part of policies and SOPs and standards and procedures for fish farming, because we know that this is already a gap. Like as has been said before, we still don't have an animal welfare, a standalone animal welfare policy in Nigeria, not to talk of aquaculture welfare. So this is definitely a gap, and it's something that is recommended as a good way to support and guide government stakeholders in the development of these welfare practices and SOPs for fish in Nigeria, and also to not just develop them, but also to implement them and ensure that they are enforced at all levels, at national and subnational levels. The last recommendation is that now we recognize that there is a high local demand in protein in the country. As mentioned earlier, it's a very large country with hundreds of millions of people. So there is naturally a demand for food, and in fact, food insecurity is becoming quite an issue in the country. And so, because of this, it has been driving the rise of factory farming. So we need to actually encourage local innovations and the development of alternative proteins to reduce pressure on factory farming of fish and other animals, and to help people to be able to have alternatives as much as possible. So you don't just depend on, it's good to diversify some of this, some of our work, which even fish farmers can even take advantage of. So those are like the key recommendations that have been highlighted in this report. So I think I have come to the end of this presentation. Thank you all so much for joining in, and thank you so much for listening. And we also want to really thank our funder, Animal Charity Evaluators, for supporting this from the beginning to the end of the project, and for being wonderful support as always. And also I want to particularly thank the team at One Health and Development Initiative for doing a good job with providing a lot of key operational and project support with this work, and also our project consultant, Madam Ariola, who was very, very key to be able to being able to engage our stakeholders, whether the Fish Farmers Association or the ones in government or the ones in the research community. Also, she's the president of the World Aquaculture Society in Africa regionally, and she's, you know, with her network, she has really been a very wonderful support with getting very, very key targeted respondents and data in regards to our research. Thank you all, and I look forward to your questions and of course further discussions on this. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Kikiope. Very insightful presentation of the results of our research. And I believe the very informative presentation must have triggered questions and feedback and thoughts within the minds of our listeners. So it's time for us to throw in our questions and feedback from the entire presentation. So if you have any question, if you don't want to speak, you can easily just write it in the chat box and I'll read it out, and then we take it up from there. But if you have a question that you want to ask yourself, you could just unmute yourself and get on with it.
Okay, I think we have a question from Waimi. Please go ahead.
It might be some sort of, okay, I see a hand up.
Yes, good afternoon,
yes,
everyone.
please.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the presentation. It's really insightful. So I work in the Niger Delta, and I saw that rivers and Bayelsa were studied. So the one thing I wanted to ask, were some of the farmers, do they consider the areas where their farms are? Because research has showed us that most of the farms are in communities where the land, even if you dig boreholes, the water is polluted. So maybe they are also not considering that, because for us in the Niger Delta, even in residential places, farms are being made and they are also being polluted. So has that also been considered in the research, that perhaps the Niger Delta is also having that issue of pollution, so that might affect them and they don't have knowledge on fish welfare? So that's one thing I just wanted to ask if it was considered. The other thing I wanted to talk about is, I know we talk about fish welfare, but have we also considered the traditional practices, like in those days, how people, because for us, I'm an Ishekiri person, and how we tend to fish is, we treat fishes like they are gods and deities. So you have to be careful with it. So perhaps maybe future research needs to consider traditional practices and to see how maybe that can influence. So, and also I know there is a movie, even the recent, what do you call them? The Avatar talked about fish welfare, and that threw a light, but that is majorly abroad and not in Nigeria. So, and then I also wanted to think of, are there other ways we can involve women in fishing, not just in selling? I know that they sell.
That's a good one.
Different parts of from production all the way to consumption and all that. Is there a way that women can be encouraged? That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Wayemi, for your questions. Very wonderful, insightful questions. So for the one on, the pollution issue in Nigeria, in Niger Delta, rather. So this was one of the things that actually came out from, and like I said, when I mentioned talking about part of the goals of our research, or the outcome, is that it creates a platform to be able to do further research on areas that were not initially considered. So, and in fact, this particular part of pollution was a thing that the farmers complained about, and which I mentioned, that I talked about water quality. A lot of them talked about water quality, and even our KII stakeholders also mentioned that. And this definitely is a cause for further research, and which can be looked into after this general broad information that we have given on this. Then for local traditional practices, I totally agree with you. I remember I mentioned again that I said that it is important for us to localize what the general standards of fish welfare practice is. So the goal, and what I see is that I know that even though there is a certain standard as what is considered globally, but we also need to look at our local environment and see what exactly are the norms, look at our sociocultural practice and be able to adapt whatever is considered as standards to our local environment. Because, you know, climates differ, fish species differ, a lot of things differ, and so aquaculture welfare practice will vary. But the key thing that must be followed is that the 5 freedoms of welfare must be the standard. So whatever practice that we are doing, whether it is local, whether we are using local resources, or we are adapting what has been set in other countries already experiencing or utilizing these aquaculture welfare practices, as long as we are meeting and obeying the 5 freedoms of welfare, and in this case for fish, then we are good to go. So yes, I'm very much for local adaptation of standards and procedures on how we can, use what our local available resources to get our goal of fish welfare. Then the other thing is on gender balance. Yes, I mean, I was actually shocked myself that, oh my God, I thought we had more women in fish production, but well, again, this can be looked at later once we begin interventions for our work. Okay, so Madam Foluke.
Thank you very much. And I'm speaking now because I have another meeting in, say, 5 minutes by 4. I have to be at another meeting, so I may be rushing off. I want to thank you very much for the research, well carried out research, and the analysis was quite impressive in terms of going down to details about the strata of people that were interviewed. That was quite very good, because then it gives credence to your research work as covering different levels and different people involved in the aquaculture value chain. Having said that, there's the need for legislative backing for regulations that we need to be in place. And that's an area that there wasn't much emphasis on, and it's important that should happen. Because I know that for most countries that we have trading interest with, they are looking forward to equivalence in our practices. And if we cannot back up some of the things we are saying, and so that farmers know that they must comply with them, and that this is the way to go, then it make it a little bit different to expand the market to the export market for people to be able to have access, because then we can harmonize our practices, and that will be an issue. But I want to really say a big thank you to OHDI for laying this background. At least that there's a background upon which other people and even you can still build on. I noticed that Catalina Lopez was asking if you are going to put this in a paper so that it's available for others to read and know what you have done. But what I want to say here is there's a need to document all the practices that have to do with fish welfare. Document, make it available to the farmers, which I think you are already working on. But then the backing it up with government regulations is important. I know that with the level of organization of the associations, there's a way you can walk through the association and the people will, to a large extent, go by the regulations, because they do self-regulatory activities within the associations. And one good thing you can leverage upon is that members of this association, whether Catfish Association of Nigeria or the other Catfish Farmers Association of Nigeria, they all have this common goal of making profit out of their enterprises. And so they are even doing more than in other countries where they are there's a better playing ground for practitioners. Here you see them going into wanting to produce their feed when cost of fish feed became so expensive, looking for ways to sell because of flooding, because of the political atmosphere where there's no fund and cash to. So they're doing a lot on their own. And I know that if you work with them, there are people will, to a large extent, follow the practices once they know what to do. So I thank you very much. I know I cannot go into the, also there's the need to document the local and traditional practices. If it gives me time, I will keep on talking, and I have to join another meeting. Now.
Oh, okay.
I congratulate you for a good outing and thank you for a very good research.
Thank you.
So thank you. Bye now.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you so much. I see a question in the chat box. Joseph was curious to know if you've made contact with the Ministry of Environment during the research, and is inquiring if the IE was put into place to check the setting for the fish farms. Said it was critical to formulate policies around environmental compliance in order to boost fish welfare and the environmental health.
Yes, so in terms of our contact with government industries, we did have contact. I mean, we definitely interviewed. We had interviews from government officials, particularly at the state level. So, and for the ones who talked about, for the 5 government officials, some of them directors and some of them officials, they did mention the part of policies and compliance with but not specifically for setting up fish farms. So again, this was just giving the responses or the results that we wanted to achieve, was that we wanted to have a broad overview of knowledge, attitudes, and practices of fish or aquaculture welfare. And so this part of setting up farms and formulation of policies really came out strong, particularly the policy part, as something that needs to be addressed moving forward. Like, I mean, this is a key part of what has been, what has not allowed aquaculture welfare standards to be set up. So now that we understand the fact that policy is an issue of us, just like Madam Ariola just mentioned about the policy part, it's something that we can always take forward with the government stakeholders that we will continue to engage in our meetings. And also to mention that, I mean, after this entire research was one thing that we wanted to use as a background framework to even give us as an organization information as to what to do next. We didn't want to just, with OHDI, we don't want to just jump into interventions. We want to do our research, see what is on ground, what are the gaps, what are the issues, how can we come in as a non-profit, how can we work with the government to support them in setting up these policies and implementing them, in training farmers, in improving standards and improving general welfare of animals, including fish. So these are the kind of things. So we have achieved this. We have achieved this by having this research now, and we'll publish our report. And then this can be used as a background for how we want to now move forward with regards to implementing interventions for aquaculture welfare and management generally in Nigeria. So I hope I've answered your question. And then for yes, we are going to very much publish this in a journal and also as a technical report. So both of them would be completed as soon as we can and to be disseminated to all stakeholders where necessary, once it's completed.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, Joseph got that. Thank you so much, Dr. Kikiope.
Oh, okay. Joseph was the one that asked.
Yeah, he got that. Yeah. So do we have any more questions?
You.
I think in the absence of no more questions, we've done an hour. I'd like to just thank everyone for honoring our invitation again. It's been a very informative and very insightful session. I'm very sure that we've started something that is novel, and we will build on from here on to getting more interventions done. So, of course, we are welcome for any kind of collaborations.
Exactly, yeah.
And internationally. So just get in touch with us and we can get something rolling. So that said, yeah. I would like to...
Another thing, sorry, excuse me.
Yeah. Yes, please.
Another thing I do want to mention is that when we are going to be sharing the reports, first of all, to validate it, and then before publication, in terms of want to get your inputs or your feedback as to the reports, is it comprehensive enough? Is it the results? Are there some things that we still haven't considered? It's something that we want to get your input before with the final, particularly with technical reports before the final publication. So thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Doctor. I'd like to also express gratitude to the entire team that put this together, the OHDI team, the animal welfare lead, the programs assistant, and everybody, the M&E officer. We really have done a good job. You can see the results of it. People have commended, and it's worth giving thanks for. So until later we see again, it will be bye for now from me. So you all take care and enjoy the rest of the day. Bye, everyone.